bringing you a steady stream of thought-provoking ideas and cutting-edge innovation. You're listening to Society and the State. Life, liberty, and your pursuit of happiness. Now, your hosts, Connor Boyack and Brian Hyde.
Well, hello there, and welcome to Society and the State. Brian Hyde here along with Connor Boyack. And I'm sure a lot of people have heard of Alfie Evans. If you haven't, well, you're the exception. Alfie, of course, the 26-month-old boy who recently passed away in Great Britain. And Connor, this is one of the few issues I've seen that actually got a lot of people out of their comfort zone and actively thinking and engaging, because this was not clear-cut in a lot of ways, but it seems like there's a very intense principle that's at stake here. I'm not even sure that I can quantify what I mean by that, other than the government of Great Britain made decisions that effectively shut Alfie's parents out of the picture as to how this child's life would come to an end. Is that fair enough?
I think that's a good description. You know, Alfie's story was a rather tragic one. As you said, 26 months old, I believe, at the time of his passing. He had suffered some seizures, I believe it were. He had some debilitating seizures. This is in Liverpool, and had been in the hospital, I think, like well over a year. It's this degenerative neurological condition. The doctors were struggling to identify it. But what you had, which was rather interesting, was this legal case where the parents and the physicians, the hospital administrators, clashed over the determination of what should be done with Alfie. Now, little Alfie was in this like vegetative state, right? He was just on life support and just being kept alive with all these machines and being sustained while the physicians were trying to figure out what, if anything, could be done. And you had attempts by the parents to relocate Alfie. And what it set up was this clash between the parents and the hospital. Who gets to decide? Now, what's interesting is you say this issue, I saw it too, brought out a whole lot of people to become sideline political commentators who I haven't really seen get too political. And I chalked it up to kind of the mama bear instinct, right?
Yeah, there's a lot of emotion involved.
Because a lot of parents could see themselves in the shoes of these parents. They could very easily imagine, what if this happened, to my child? What if this happened to me, to our family? What would we do? How would I act? And that ability to put yourself in their shoes, to imagine how that would go, what that would be like, I think is what led a lot of people to start paying attention to this case, to sound off about it, to form opinions about it, to read about it. I think that's a good thing.
Yeah, anytime the discussion can get going, there's potential for good stuff to happen. One of the things that has really astonished me, and I guess I'm a little naive, I learned, because I didn't think there were people out there who held this, but I was surprised the number of people who stuck up for the courts and the doctors and the government in Britain, saying, well, now somebody had to make a humane decision here about this. The kid wasn't getting better. It was clear he was going to die. His parents were obviously not going to make the right choice. And I went, wow, where did that become the default thinking? Well, if their parents are too involved and they can't make a right choice.
They're biased.
So who gets to make the choice as to whether the quality of this boy's life justifies keeping him alive, or whether we should do the merciful thing and remove food and water and let him starve to death?
Yeah, especially the challenge that we have here is that when healthcare has been socialized, it gives the nexus for the government to step in and have a seat at the table to say, well, if taxpayers are funding this, then we need to make a cost-benefit analysis. If you're going to make everybody pay for this, and it's unlikely that little Alfie or whoever, 84-year-old Betsy, is going to survive much longer, what's the point? Why prolong this? That's the argument. I find it a horrendous argument, but that is the problem with inviting the government into healthcare, with socializing the costs onto others. You are allowing those others to help drive your healthcare costs, or decisions, to help determine your healthcare decisions. That's frightening.
Well, there are no shortage of people, apparently, that have been taught to see the state as kind of a hybrid between God and a parent. And it comes through loud and clear when they say that, the state had to make a tough decision here, and it was the state's call. And I just, in Alfie's case, look, clearly the boy was dying. I think every medical professional acknowledged that. I think his parents even acknowledged that. What interest was served by the state maintaining its prerogative that, no, we're in control here, and we cannot release him to his parents, and we cannot allow him to be flown to another country. All those arrangements had been made, but the state, the British government, put its foot down and said, no, we can't let that happen. And I'm trying to understand what the justification is in cases like that the state would assume that it is the one who has the final say.
The challenge we have here, I've seen a lot of people offer up analyses about, could this happen here in America, right? Is this an isolated thing? Is this just the UK gone mad? I mean, they're so mad on so many other things. Surely this can't happen here. And yet there is a Latin term for this. There is a name for this very thing we're talking about, and it plays out all the time in the United States and elsewhere. The Latin term is parens patriae, and it means father of the nation, parent of the nation, parent of the fatherland. Okay, this concept where the state is the overseer, the state is the check and balance over any parent or institution or family or church or whatever that is not sufficiently caring for one of its own. If there is a family, now let's offer up an example where this may be justified, right? You have a child who's being abused inside of a home, being neglected, not being cared for, not being fed, right? And so it is that authority, that presumption of authority, that allows the state to send its agents in, the child service workers, to snatch that child from the arms of injustice and say, we are going to care for this child, right? And so this is a case when a tool may be used very properly to save a child's life, to help someone. You have, elderly who are unfit to care for themselves, and oftentimes they're abused, especially financially. And so having the ability to provide oversight to ensure that the disadvantaged or those who are unable to care for themselves are cared for is a good thing, right? We could all argue there are private market alternatives for doing this, and I would fully agree. But I think the doctrine of parens patriae is at least somewhat justified on the basis of actually helping those who can't help themselves, this so-called safety net that we like to talk about, right? The problem is any tool, as you know, Brian, can be misused and abused. And I think that's what we see here, where this doctrine, which is legitimately used to help neglected children, for example, is used in a case like little Alfie to say, well, no, we are the parent of the nation. You parents are misjudging this. You are wrong. And because the final authority rests with us in this kind of demigod fashion, right, that we talk about, we are going to override your decision. You are going to be subject to our rule. Your wishes are going to be invalidated, and our wish is going to be fulfilled. And that's where it's extremely dangerous, when the parent in good faith who is doing legitimately what they believe is in the best interest of their child is overruled by the state because of this doctrine.
And that's to me where it felt like the case with Alfie Evans broke down, at least for the British government. And I realize this is my own filter that it's running through, but essentially what they did was they pulled the equivalent of what we do as parents sometimes, which is because I said so. The outcome would not have been different had Alfie been released to his parents. He was still going to die. That's the part that makes me wonder, so was this really about, we're just looking out for his best interest? He was going to die. Nothing his parents did were going to make it worse. I'm just sentimental thinking his parents were the ones who created him. They would have the greatest stake in seeing to his well-being, his comfort, whatever palliative care he needs as the end of his life approaches.
Part of me thinks, though, that from the state's perspective, you used the example of a parent saying, because I said so. When your authority is challenged by a teenage child, you get pulled into the psychological game of precedence. If I set a precedent here of weakness, it's going to be exploited in the future. Mm-hmm. I have to be strong. Even if my position is indefensible, I have to dig in my heels and just say, well, because I said so. I'm going to compel you to do what I'm saying because I'm worried that if I show weakness here, you're going to sabotage me in the future and I'm going to lose this parental authority, right? I think most parents, or at least former teenagers, can kind of see that playing out and be, oh yeah, okay, I get that, right? I see that's what's happening here with the state. The state is asserting dominant authority. They could easily concede, Brian, as you point out, that, okay, yeah, fine, he's dying anyways, go have your last few weeks with him, we wish you the best of luck. But the fact that they had made a decision and a determination, they had to dig in their heels, if for nothing else than to establish and maintain their authority, not for this case. They knew this case was over. They knew little Alfie was dying. I think it's for the future.
Just in general. Yeah, you ever heard of the Pickering family from Texas?
Sounds familiar.
Okay, because there's a story here. There's a similarity. It wasn't the exact outcome, but their 27-year-old son had a stroke, was declared brain dead by physicians at a Houston area hospital, and they were going to take him off life support. The doctors made the decision. He's brain dead. Nothing more can be done. He's in a coma. There's just nothing more that we can do. Well, George Pickering II. This is the young man's dad. The young man was George Pickering III.
Uh-huh.
George's dad showed up at the hospital drunk with a gun. Ordered the doctors out of his son's room. Barricaded himself there, and he was there for about 3 hours before the SWAT team finally persuaded him to give himself up. So, he gave himself up. But before he gave himself up, the thing that caused him to give himself up was his son began to squeeze his hand.
Wow.
And began to blink his eyes and to respond to stimulus in the room.
Yeah.
And even the SWAT team members, when they came in to arrest his dad, noticed that patient is reacting to, the activity going on around him.
Wow.
And not only did the son come out of the coma, but he made a complete recovery.
Wow.
His dad was sentenced to 10 months in prison, but was released in time to come home and spend Christmas with his son. This was back in 2015.
He probably enjoyed every day in prison.
And yeah, I mean, and the son says, look, a law was broken, so my dad had to pay a price for it. But he says he broke that law for the right reasons.
Wow.
And because he did, it gave his son that extra shot at life. And I'm not saying that, a similar miracle would have happened in the case of Alfie. I don't think it would have. But the point is just simply this. Just because someone's wearing a lab coat, or just because someone's wearing a uniform, or because they represent this authority or that authority, doesn't mean they are automatically right.
Well, and in Alfie's case specifically, there were predictions of imminent death, and I believe they even pulled life support, and then he continued to live for like another 4 days, I think it was.
He fought on.
Oh my heavens, and I think it was, if I recall correctly, it was Italy who offered to pay for all expenses to relocate him, to provide for that palliative care, to take care of the family. I mean, good for them, the taxpayers of Italy, I guess, but kudos to them for standing up. And yet, UK said no. And you saw, Brian, the same image that I did. This wasn't just a cerebral decision that some folks over in some courtroom were making. The state has to enforce its mandates at every point where it may meet resistance. And so what was the image that we saw coming out of this? I think it's a very illustrative one that's going to be turned into a meme because it's so powerful. Outside of this hospital, you see this bright neon green line of officers in these jackets barricading the front door of the hospital, standing shoulder to shoulder, looking thuggish. If you cross this line, we will destroy you. It's not, hey, bring flowers for little Alfie. Let's come support this family. Let's rally together as a nation, as a people, or whatever. It's like, no, if you question or defy our authority, we're going to smash your face into the ground. And for everyone who extols the virtues of a socialized medical system, to me, this is the most striking image that we can see of the very end, the very nature and purpose of government involved in anything, but especially in our healthcare decisions. When the state, when the parens patriae, the father of the parent of the fatherland, says that it's your time to go, I'm sorry, but thus hath the government decreed it, and we're going to send the bright neon green jacketed thugs to enforce our mandate. That is alarming, right? When it's your 2-year-old child, and here you have these police officers refusing to let anyone in lest, the mandate be disobeyed. It's so striking. So striking.
I think you're right, and I hope that does become an image that burns itself into people's minds. This is not to say, like you were saying, that sometimes the state needs to apply its force in defense of rights. I can't for the life of me figure out exactly what they were defending other than the fact that we're the state and we have to make this stick.
Well, think of the heritage of England, giving us the common law, the Magna Carta, and you see what a deviation from these core philosophical principles leads to, right? You go ask the average Joe on the street, and they're completely disconnected from these kind of core English ideas. Now England is just this authoritarian democratic state that they just do whatever they want. There's no central underpinning. We see the same thing in America, and so I kind of chuckle when I see people say, this could never happen here. Because you have these natural rights, the natural law established in our founding documents purportedly protecting our individual liberties. And yet you ask the average Joe on the street, heck, you ask a lot of judges, and you'll see yet again this substantial deviation from these core philosophical principles. So when the rubber meets the road, you have to ask yourself, do we really think it would be that much different in our day? I am very skeptical. As horrendous as this was, when the state is going to invoke its authority, I really don't see things happening that much different in our country, and that scares me.
Well, I think we've seen it before, though. The case of Parker Jensen comes to mind, where he was diagnosed with a particular kind of cancer. Doctors at the hospital said, look, we think we need to get him under this kind of treatment. I think chemo was what they recommended. We got to do it quickly. We want to put him in this study. And his parents were like, whoa, not so fast. We want a second opinion because we think there could be lifelong repercussions like sterility if we put him on chemo.
Right.
And the doctors, with the cooperation of the state, kind of dug their heels in, made a plea that, well, we feel like he's not getting the medical help that he needs. His parents hadn't refused him medical attention. They wanted another opinion.
Yep.
And the state of Utah went after them, accused them of kidnapping them when they went to visit relatives in another state. I mean, fortunately then the state actually backed down, as it should have. I only wish that England could have had the strength to step back and go, you know what?
Let cooler heads prevail.
This is a no-win situation, so take your boy, make his last hours, as comfortable as you can. But, the power, it's just too hard to give up even a little.
And even on that Parker Jensen story, several years ago, we passed a law here in Utah in response that codifies in law a parent's right to seek a second medical opinion, because that was the core issue at hand. They wanted another doctor's opinion. They didn't want the state to hinge its coercion on the recommendation of a single guy in a lab coat, right? Very reasonable. And yet, even in passing that law, we're still kissing the ring, right, of the parent of the fatherland to say, well, yes, I will let you, if it pleases the crown, may I go seek a second medical opinion before you compel me to, compel my child to do what you want. But that is the presumption here. We enjoy our parental rights at the good graces of the government. And, if as long as we go this far and no further, Caesar's going to say, you can have those parental rights. But, man, you try doing something outside the bounds of what Caesar allows, and you'll see how far those parental rights actually go.
Just one final thought. I wanted to get your reaction to the continuing meshing of medicine and the state. I've talked to doctors who are very frustrated at the amount of bureaucracy they have to work through now that healthcare is becoming not only politicized, but it's being absorbed as almost a bureaucracy of the state. What do you see the future holds in terms of is that trend getting worse? Is there ever going to come a time where we actually will be able to separate medicine and the state?
Yeah, I think part of the thing is we've conceded the presumption of individuals caring for themselves and one another. So the presumption now is that we as a society are going to do it. It's not a question of if, it's a question of how much and in what cases. And so we've already lost the battle, it seems to me, over whether this is a good idea or not. Now it's a question of degrees. Do we want the Bernie Sanders side of things, or do we want the Mitt Romney side of things? Well, both of them are socialized healthcare. And so unfortunately, so I've been talking with a lot of physicians recently on a couple of medical policy issues. And while insurance is really the big nightmare, and that's kind of the, quote, market solution to a lot of this, I think a lot of this can be handled outside of government. I unfortunately am persuaded by these physicians and my own experiences to believe that we've kind of lost that battle, and short of some kind of medical industrial revolution, the state is a co-partner in all of our healthcare decisions, and that's a little frightening. Especially for most of us, it's just a bother, right? You have to sign these consent forms. You have to wait 14 days. You have to go get the prescription filled here. It's just these, your information is going to be in this database because you have an opiate now, and these bureaucrats want to make sure you're not abusing it. So for most of us, it's just an annoyance. And so it's tolerable. The real question becomes when you have a case like little Alfie and you really have to flex your muscle and assert your rights, who's going to do it? Right? Is it going to be a drunk guy with a gun who goes in and says, back off, right? I'm going to wait for a miracle to happen? Is it going to be a parent like Alfie's parents who pled? They didn't assert. To my knowledge, at no time did they assert. They pled. They begged.
Yeah.
And it shows the relationship between you and your government when you're begging for your rights, your parental rights.
Even though you were kind of tongue-in-cheek when you said, if it please the crown, that's a better descriptor of their situation than probably most realize.
And I think we're inching there here in America with our own healthcare system, where it's the good graces of the overseers as to how, when, and to what extent it's done. I think we have to learn from cases like this, and it's tragic, and it's a big warning, I would say.
Listen, we thank you for joining us for this episode of Society and the State. This is episode 77. And we invite you to join us for the next one. More exciting stuff straight ahead.
Thanks for listening to Society and the State. For show notes, archives, and more great content, visit societyandthestate.com.